The moderator of the next session, Kersti Kaljulaid.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for being with us this afternoon. This panel about our dear old Europe, about the tech uptake in Europe, is the second edition of the GLOBSEC GeoTech Center Summit panel within the GLOBSEC in Prague. And those of you who were here last year remember our bottlenecks and our opportunities which were brought out. I seriously hope we have made progress, but we will soon find out. Please welcome my panelists for today. General John Allen, the leader of our GeoTech Center, retired general, of course. Amy Hogan-Burney from Microsoft, VP, and Chris Miller of GeoTech and also American Enterprise Institute. And finally, our own General Phil Lavigne, the European voice on this panel. And what is extremely important to add is that we are all actually the strategic advisors for the GeoTech Center, thanks to the invitation of John, who has really worked hard to get us all here and get you a good presentation for today. Thank you, John, for organizing it. And I believe you wanted the first word, so please go ahead. We take a seat.
Okay, thanks. First, it's such a pleasure and an honor to have all of you join us for this portion of the forum, which we're calling the GeoTech Summit. And as Kersti said, this is the second year for us. It's going to be a long, long run of these kinds of events, because we truly believe that the GLOBSEC GeoTech Center is an extremely important source for policy and research as we go forward to help equip Europe during this very difficult time of unstable geopolitics and perhaps shifting geostrategic relationships. And so we're so grateful that you could join us this afternoon. And we've been holding events all day long. We're going to hold some more tomorrow. But I also wanted to make one quick comment. You will note that most people don't have my name tag on right now, but almost all the name tags you see are suspended by a certain color lanyard. And I make this announcement every year. This is my 10th year here. And the ones that are green are the youngest members of the staff. And they're in school, they're in college, they're just recently employed, perhaps after graduating. I always make the point that they really are the ones who are working so hard to make this conference go from moment to moment. So when you have a second, take one of them aside, find out where she's from or he's from or what they do, what their ambitions are in life, and don't hesitate to help do a little mentoring. Because truly, as we talk about, thank you. As we talk about the future of Europe in technology and the future of Europe in competitiveness, that's who's going to do it for us. My generation, our generation, has done our best, but they're the generation that's going to carry on. So don't hesitate to thank them for what they're doing for us today. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Kersti.
Thank you, John, and indeed we join you in thanking all our volunteers and the green volunteers indeed, especially. So thank you all for making our presence here so comfortable. And one last housekeeping remark. We use Slido as in all sessions, so please keep those questions coming. I will see and pick some of them for our panelists, especially. I promise you I'll pick the most challenging ones. But if some of you are not still comfortable with the technologies, because after all, we're all Europeans, so you can just do it in the analog way and raise your hand and try to catch my attention. I mean, the lighting allowing, I will give you the floor as well. So let's now take stock of where our Europe is. Yes, indeed, it is time to step up and we need to command in chaos, and we've heard many words today about how Europe has to step into the void and how Europe has to expand its international cooperation and also how Europe has to lead in technology. And my first question is rather open to all my panelists, and this is about, is there an area where you feel Europe is particularly advanced? How, for our American friends, do you actually envy us in some point as well to take a positive turn of the things? So if somebody wants to come forward, be it...
I'll start. I envy you because of where you live. That's a pretty good start. I think Europe has a lot of relative advantages. First of all, the human resource of Europe is really in many respects unparalleled in the world. There's so much talent in European universities, so much talent in the tech community in Europe, that this is a capability that Europeans have a lot of opportunity to leverage. And Europeans have been extraordinarily innovative as well. Many of some of the most important machines, some of the most important inventions that we have seen over the last 20 years in regard to technology started here in Europe. So Europe is innovative. Europe has enormous amounts of talent. And we'll talk, I guess, about the deficiencies later. But the challenge that Europe faces is the capacity to scale. And that's really where the problems begin for us. This is an era where we're going to face what I would call technology hotspots around the world. And there's one in North America, there's one in Europe, there's one in China, and there's another one emerging in India. And I think for the future of the transatlantic relationship, it's in our interests that the United States and Europe has to make this trip together, shoulder to shoulder. Now, we're having some problems, obviously, in Washington right now with regard to some of the dynamics and the bombast and all of that. But in the end, the American people with the European people, I think we share a lot of values. And one of the great strengths that Europe brings, a comparative advantage, is that Europe brings incomparable values to its approach to technology. Because we have seen in the world many places where less desirable values or even horrific values are applied to the technologies, and it's a mess. It's horrific. The value that we see in Europe are the ethical values that we think they can leverage as well. So the United States and Europe has to be fellow travelers going forward, because if we are not, then we can't ultimately afford the competition that I think will emerge in East Asia or in the South.
Thank you, General. Amy, you come from Microsoft, a private company, a global partner for everyone here in this room,
Yes.
from all 80 countries who are here today. What are the enablers for tech diffusion here in Europe?
First, I think one of the biggest enablers in Europe is the embrace of multilateralism. Europe, just in general, has an innate ability to work together, and it is incredible to see the embrace of NATO, which I think is incredibly important at this time, and then the embrace of nations that are not part of NATO. And that is going to be one of the most important things collectively working together to allow trust, security, which will allow innovation. And General Allen touched on this also. I think it is also the cultural aspects, the democracy, the humanity, the respect for human rights, privacy, the things that we see every day in working with customers across Europe. Those are the real, I think, advantages in Europe.
That's very encouraging. And indeed, this is what we believe, that there is value in values. And what you have said actually matches what we always say. So now the question is how to make these values really to work for the technology. And of course, many see dangers in technology, but also, I mean, there is something which we do here in Europe is we try to regulate that technology. Might that be actually also a positive element, Chris? Provocative, I know.
Well, when I think about the technology stack and ask about technology leadership, it's pretty clear that no one region is the dominant player in every segment of the stack. Start from application software, to cloud computing, to the semiconductors that make it possible, to the machines that make the chips that enable all of our technology. In a lot of those segments, Europe's actually already a key player. Take, for example, the production of semiconductors. Many types of chips are produced best by European companies. The cutting-edge research into the next generation is done by European research institutes. And then the machines that make chips, the chemicals that make it possible, the ultra-advanced materials, these are places where Europe already has leading firms. So when I hear Europe talk about its need to improve its position, I say, well, it depends where you look, because at many segments, Europe is actually already the leader. And so I think for Europe, the challenge is both to improve and to take advantage of the opportunity to grow in the segments where it's not currently leading, but also to make sure it defends those positions where it does have extraordinary companies with really world-beating capabilities.
Fantastic. Phil, I mean, what are your thoughts about European technological advantages?
Well, thank you very much for all has already been said, because I think it's true, of course, and it means that there are a lot of opportunities. I will take the other sense. We are in Europe in a special environment. There is the war in Ukraine. We are under attack, huge competition. We know what we need to do. Capability targets are going to be validated in next La Hague summit. And there will be space package, there will be IT package, there will be a lot of things to be done. So I think it's our opportunity is we are under pressure. And we've got hurdles, so we know the hurdles. And we have to either push the hurdles or to jump above the hurdles. Bureaucracy, and everybody is talking about in EU simplification, more investment, and in EU, and the European Investment Bank is putting more money, and you've got investment fund, private equity, who are looking at where to put their money, because now investing in defense is not as bad as before. So that means that, as you say, we've got technology, we've got talents, and we will have less hurdle to do that, but and we've got the pressure, and we have to take the responsibility to be better in this tech. And what is nice is good also, and I'm always optimistic, and there are a lot of opportunities. It's not only about tech or IT, it's about the convergence of everything. Tech, IT with biotech. It's to make a lot of progress in healthcare. It's about 5G, and Nokia and Ericsson and the Nordics are so great in this with space and AI to provide this hyper connectivity we need, for example. And in Europe we've got Ukraine. And we've got this talent and the way they are innovating with any emerging and disruptive technologies. So it's because we are also under pressure and we've got many things that we are going to be better tomorrow or tonight.
Thank you. I would also like to advertise for GLOBSEC GeoTech Center's production. We have provided you with the tech adoption tracker, and it does assess the EU strategies on semiconductor manufacturing, AI adoption, and defense tech. But there is something which I think we should also, John, maybe analyze in our work, and this is the development of trust. There is a question from our audience which actually matches well with the theme. The audience wants to know, how do you balance multilateral cooperation with security, and especially the protection of IP from unauthorized proliferation of cutting-edge technologies? I think this is also something, Amy, where you want to come in, of course, because indeed it's a question of building trust. Otherwise, you cannot depend if you do not have trust. So I don't know who wants to start.
Well, let me come in on the NATO piece and perhaps on the cybersecurity and the trust piece you've got as well. That's one of your principal roles. As Amy said a few minutes ago, there has never been an alliance in the history of humankind that has been as effective as NATO has. And it's built on trust. It's built, the effectiveness of NATO is built on a common commitment to each other, as embraced in Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, which is an attack on one of us, is an attack on all of us. And it's truly based on the trust that if there is an attack on one of us, that we'll all close ranks around that individual state and be prepared to take whatever steps are necessary to defend. And by the way, Article 5 has only been invoked one time, and that was when the United States was attacked on 9/11.
And by the way, digital is a domain, so basically all this goes
that is correct.
The same article.
And so as we see multi-domain operations really dominating 21st century warfare, and virtually all of the multi-domain operations have a high-tech or an emerging tech or an advanced tech dimension to it. We're going to have to accept the fact that there will need to be trust in our multilateralism and trust in this transatlantic alliance, that we will apply these technologies properly within the rule of law, in compliance with our values with respect to humanity. And I think that multilateralism is still very much alive. You know, there's been a lot of rhetoric of late. I would look at our actions and not pay as much attention to our words. And the United States still remains extremely committed to Europe's security, and we will be for a very long time. Now, the whole issue about Ukraine, et cetera, how that may resolve, that's still also in the air. But from my perspective, multilateralism is alive. The United States is committed to European security. And another very important point is there is a lot of cooperation between U.S. private sector and European private sector. And on those occasions, frequently, where we hear the environment may seem a bit toxic between our two sides across the Atlantic, I think what we're seeing is that the private sector reach across the transatlantic alliance is still very solid and very effective. And in many respects, we may see over the next months or years that the private sector linkage in the tech community is going to carry the relationship forward. And I'm confident of that.
It's interesting that last year we were mostly talking about how to quickly spread new technologies which we in Europe did not invent into European industry and therefore kind of leverage our productivity and do these things. This year it's all about trust, and as you can see the questions appearing. I think indeed this is something, Amy, which a company like yours has to address, and I know you have done so. So could you explain to our audience a little bit how you navigate this new landscape where people are asking questions, can Brussels trust Washington? What are the relations 1 year from now? And you are in the middle of it. Yeah. Your results depend on it, and you have clients globally. So how you handle this kind of situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first way that you handle it is by recognizing that while you are a US-based company, you are a global company. And we've been a global company for over 40 years. We've been a company for 50 years. And that's a very mature tech company who's been in the industry for quite a long time. So we have a history here where we've been able to be very principled, I think, around the world. But that's actually not enough. You can't just be principled and quiet. You actually have to be principled, and you have to be clear, and you have to be direct, and you have to share those principles. And so one of the things that we've done is made sure that our principal commitment to Europe and around the world is clear. So in April, we made clear our resiliency commitments in Europe, regardless of the geopolitical landscape, that we would be here. And if anything happened, that there was going to be any directives by our US government to cut off service inside Europeans to our customers, that we would fight that we would commit to that through our contractual commitments as well, that we would build our technology such to enforce those legal commitments that we were making also. And so I think those are some of the beginning of the commitments that we made. And we followed those resiliency commitments up with cybersecurity commitments last week. So we introduced a new European security commitment where we will be sharing more information in order to secure systems across Europe. We'll be doing that by using more AI-based intelligence that we have, so taking our security programs and sharing them more broadly. We'll be sharing more information regarding influence operations, which I think is very important in this space as we're seeing across Europe. And we're doing more disruptions. So one of the things I think that's really important also is that we've identified even more infrastructure, and we want to protect more victims inside Europe. And so what is it that we can do to take that extra mile? But that's just the beginning of this. So once we've shared, we also need feedback. And so the public-private partnership and cooperation starts with our principal position, our clear transparency in announcing and sharing that. But it doesn't stop there, because governments and customers then get to actually provide feedback that we can then address. So we have to have that virtuous cycle in order to have it continue. So I think this is the beginning of that journey. And I think General Allen is right. We plan on staying. We've been in Europe for 40 years. We plan to continue for at least 40 more, regardless of what administration is inside the US.
Yes, Chris, please.
Could I pick up on the question of intellectual property, which was raised?
Oh, yeah,
I think is a really important one. Obviously, it's been a complicated couple of months for political relations between the US and EU, but if you talk to companies, both in Europe and in the US and in Japan and in Korea, and ask them, what's your number one concern about IP risk? Well, it's not any of the other countries that I've mentioned. It's obviously China by a very wide margin. And so this is an important shared interest that has persisted. That's a priority for tech companies in particular, and I think drives both Europe and the US and also our friends in Asia together.
General, I noticed that our auditorium is saying that they are most interested in defense technologies and their development and this uptake. What do you think about that? I mean, in Europe, do we really are in the forefront, considering that we have on our continent the war which is going on, which is actually very tech-heavy? Are we doing our job properly? Could we do more? What is missing?
Maybe I've got more than
27 minutes, 45 seconds. Everybody else can.
No, sorry.
Yeah.
Just to come back on, if I may, on the balance between multi-cooperation and security. With security, I think
absolutely.
I think that in the digital transformation we are facing the challenge, and there are many opportunities to do that, because of course the data centricity means also data resilience and data security, and there are many tools to do that, but at the same time we need the data to be shared, because on the battlefield, because at the national level we need for example, in the alliance. And there are also tools to provide multi-cloud for such an organization as like the alliance. So I think we can do both multi-cooperation and provide security even at the national level. And of course, we have to be sure that we are going to be interoperably native, of course, in order to work together and to work with open architecture, agnostic of anything. So that's the way I'm thinking about multi-cooperation and security. Private and public sector, which is good, also is about we are in the military side of the house. We are looking at private sector in order to fulfill the needs, and for example, with services. If we are taking the space as an example, we need services, and we need services to get the Earth observation, but also to get this connectivity, to get this surveillance of space. Back to your last questions. Are we good at? Well, I think that we've got great industry base in defense industry in Europe, and either in the land and the sea, and we've got amazing country like Estonia, for example, in cyber, and with this capability to train, but not only in Estonia. NATO has a lot of exercises in order to build this resilience and security. We've got hypervelocity, we've got a lot of things, but what we need is to, and it was said by Mr. Kubilius this morning, with the new capability targets that NATO has put on the table, and nations are going to validate them. We are in Europe at about 50% of the needs to be fulfilled, and we don't have time. It's a race, and so that means that I think the gap we have to fulfill is the ability to produce more and differently. That's it for me.
John, you wanted to comment on the same.
Philippe's points are absolutely correct. I agree with all of them. The reality, of course, is that we are moving into what we would call a hyper-war environment. The Chinese have embraced this technology. They've embraced this concept, which is the more that you digitalize the functions of battle across all the principal domains, the more quickly you can move in war. And of course, war is the ultimate time competitive competition. And just came from East Asia, where I met with a lot of our Asian partners. We have 5 bilateral defense treaties there as well as the NATO treaty. And the reality is this: we're watching closely the Ukrainians fight a digitalized war. And I'm not sure that we're ready in Europe or in the United States to fight that same kind of conflict. And I'll just boil it down into perhaps the bumper stickers. To be effective in a hyper-war environment, to be faster and to be able to accelerate past your enemy on a regular basis, you have to fight from a hyperscale classified cloud or protected cloud. The Ukrainians are in the cloud. They're actually using Azure. You have to apply AI tools to sort through the masses of data that are coming off of the systems in the battle space and move into the cloud. You sort through them at very high speeds, very rapid sorting, very rapid classification, using specialized AI tools. And then ultimately, that information is digitally moved either to firing units or to other kinds of organizations within the unit in particular. And fighting from the cloud, we say, AI tools applied for the sorting of the data. And then very importantly, both of those things have to be protected by unique cybersecurity capabilities. Fight from the cloud, AI tools, defend in the cloud. We are nowhere near that right now. But for every single day in Ukraine, the Ukrainian warriors are taking it to the Russians by doing that very thing. And we're moving to a point in warfare today where we're beginning to accelerate so rapidly that the role of the human in decision-making is beginning to slow the capacity to be effective on the battlefield. And this is an ethical issue. This goes back to Amy's point about values, our point about values writ large across the board. As we embrace more and more battlefield autonomy, as we ultimately give systems the capabilities to both acquire the target, identify the target, and potentially engage that target with no human in the loop. Well, that's where the Chinese and the Russians are. And that makes them move very quickly. We in the West, we in Europe and the United States, in our military, we are not ready yet to provide that level of discretion to fully autonomous systems to take human life or to destroy critical infrastructure. This inherently makes us slightly slower because we have a human in the loop or a human on the loop. But none of this is possible if we're not fighting with high technology in the cloud and applying AI tools. The Ukrainians are doing it every single day, and there's a lot we can learn from them.
If I could just add to
Yes,
that
please.
for 1 minute. You can imagine that I never thought I would find myself talking about military and defense. If you look at me and where I work, this does not seem like a topic that I would, but I have more often than not. And it did start with Ukraine, as you mentioned. But actually, more often than not now, I find myself in the cyberspace thinking about it frequently because of the way cyber attackers are operating now. And I have at least 2 examples recently, and both of them from China with both Salt Typhoon and Volt Typhoon, of where we are seeing attacks that are where some would say they are just espionage, but I would argue they are not. It is the attack in telecommunications providers or in critical infrastructure systems that are persistent. And the persistence looks to be pre-positioning. And when you have pre-positioning in a critical infrastructure system, that to me is more than espionage. That is pre-positioning in the event of conflict, which then leads itself to being more in the defense and military capabilities. And that means that in the event of conflict or readying for conflict, just like we saw in Ukraine, because the first attack was cyber and not kinetic, then of course what we are seeing in China is the persistence in the event that this is going to happen. And General Allen and I were together in Taiwan, and the exact conversation that we are having is are these cyber attacks persistence for pre-positioning because we are going to see these cyber attacks before a kinetic attack as well. And so I think you cannot be in a place where you are not monitoring these threats, that you don't have this visibility, and that you are not preparing in the way that General Allen is talking about here in Europe.
And one of the problems that we have with this is it's not really possible to be certain that these activities, exactly as Amy has said, are pre-conflict, what we call, for those of you who are military planners, phase 0 activities by the enemy to prepare the battle space, ultimately, to transition to a major cyber attack just ahead of the kinetic attack. We don't know for sure, but this is exactly what we have to be concerned about, and that is whether these are all phase 0 activities.
And if I may, to add of that is the combination of things. We mentioned cyber attacks, but we can speak about phase 0 in space also, where where the adversary is going to reduce our ability to see and of course to understand, but also the cognitive aspect of the also in the phase 0, in order to destabilize our people, to reduce our ability to understand what is going on, and then you have the fait accompli.
Nicely said.
Well, Chris, they are all practitioners, and what they have just told our auditorium is that never mind that in Ukraine these technologies are being used to achieve a kinetic effect. All the rest of the world, including NATO territories, all the free world, is under exactly the same attack from the same technologies. The only difference being nobody's killed. Basically, we are at war. This is what they told us. What is your take of this, what our auditorium has also been asking on the Slido about regulation in Europe, in this case? I mean, if it's the war, if we need to move fast, if we need to be upfront, should we, perhaps instead of trying to be the best regulators, as was supposed by our auditorium, be the ones who are the best, who can choose the trusted partners and allow them to run loose to win this competition, if it's the war anyway? Chris, please, your academic take of what the practitioners have said.
Well, I would say there's different things you could try to regulate. I think Europe's focused on consumer protection, regulation vis-a-vis companies, trying to protect consumers from companies. And there's certainly a place for that. I think what there's been much less of a focus on is protecting our societies, our economies, our governments from the types of threats that we've been discussing here. And I think Europe's not alone in underplaying these risks, both at the hardware level and at the software level. But I would say in the regulation conversation, we've got to think not just about what are the potential harms that might come from this or that social media company, important topic, but also what are the harms that could come from Russia or China, which is also a very important topic. And it's easier for politicians to focus on the first category, because everyone loves talking about social media, but it's probably much more important in the long run to focus on, are we protecting ourselves from the real threats that we do face in the cybersphere?
Yeah, that's my question. Isn't it all obsolete? I mean, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we get things done, and we get things done with trusted partners. I mean, this is the radical change, the radical shift, and therefore, if we get this right in Europe, then our tech uptake might actually, increase considerably. Since the auditorium is defense-oriented, we should not procure the tanks or the ammunition or the javelins. We should procure the capability to kill Russians quicker than they kill us in 3 years' time, in 5 years' time, in 7 years' time. Is this what we need to now consider tech uptake? Trust the companies, trust the tech developers, to come up with the best solution at the moment when we need these solutions.
I think that's right. And I think the moment you start digging into the technology stack that we discussed, you find that the top of the stack, the software layer, is largely, not exclusively Western, but the deeper you go, the more you rely in particular on Chinese components. And of course, China is Russia's largest and most important backer in its war against Ukraine. And I think Europe's been behind the curve relative to Japan, relative to the US, relative to Taiwan, other democracies, in taking steps to defend itself against this type of prepositioning, which takes place both in the software domain, but also in the technology hardware domain too.
Can I come in on this? It's not a regulatory issue, but we've talked about it today a couple of places. You know, one of the deficiencies that Europe's going to have to face is the deficiency of critical raw materials. And the rare earth elements that make the magnets that give us the capacity for high-end military capabilities. Just in the permitting process, to get the permits, to cut the ground, to begin the process of the extraction here in Europe, and there are relatively limited capabilities, but there are deposits of critical raw materials and rare earths. Just to get the permission to cut the ground right now is a period of time of 10 to 15 years. I mean, you're strategically irrelevant with those kinds of permitting requirements, many of which are fully within our capability of adjusting because the Canadians are at 2 years, the Australians are at 2 years, the Chinese are at 2 years, the US is trying to reduce that amount of time, and I know that Europe is fixed on this as well. But those are the kinds of self-inflicted limitations on our capacity, as you said, Kersti. We need to be able to fight tonight. We need to be able to make decisions that we can implement right away. And if our ability to make those decisions and move out to defend ourselves is constrained by a regulatory framework or a permitting process that makes us strategically irrelevant, we need to take a very hard look at that. Now, as Chris said, much of the regulatory environment that Europe lives within is a values-based environment. And I really commend Europe for doing that. But we're going to have to look very, very hard at ways that we can streamline this going forward. Because in the end, war is about a time competition. And we can't be number 2 in this process.
Phil, do you want to comment on that? And I may also, call attention to one of the questions which our auditorium has asked on this subject, precisely this subject. As a general, former general, how did you convince the government that this is the right way to do? To be quick, to trust, to waive unnecessary regulations, to go straight for the objective, and recognize that what is the most important thing is to win the competition, not to, have a due process.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that today it's easier than yesterday. Yesterday, it was minus, everything was reducing. So of course, nations are trying to get the best exquisite things to do everything. No, today we need to have the mass, a sustainable mass. So that means that, and there is a race, and it's more and faster. So how to win? as I say when I was in NATO, it's to have a collective defense doesn't mean that you can't be offensive, because it's the offensive that is the best way of doing things. It's why we have talked a lot about this deep precision strike. In certain countries, you've got the offensive cyber. We are thinking about this cognitive superiority. My point is not only to predict the future, is to build, is to shape and contest the future. In order to build the future, you need for more stability and prosperity. So how to convince them? I think that we need to showcase the things, to experiment, to learn by doing, and I think that tech company and tech spirit is able to help us, and it will be through civil and military cooperation that we will bring this new état d'esprit.
Yeah, it's very interesting that somebody has pointed out that actually Draghi report mentions all these deficiencies which you mentioned, John, as well. And then the question obviously is, why do we talk and why don't we act precisely? I think we should be far faster in fulfilling these gaps and getting what needs to be done. And I understand we have no lack of capital on this continent. We have no lack of trusted partners like Microsoft and other global companies. We have no lack of innovative ideas, and even now we see that European companies are really good at tech uptake. Not globally in Europe, but I mean, it's in the best countries, quarter of the companies are using the artificial intelligence. We have the best talent, let's say, in quantum. We are, moving forward leaps and bounds, with the help of private sector, on the cloud technology.
Right.
Yet, we feel insecure in our tech uptake. Why? Why is that?
Well, I think it's a question of lack of knowledge, lack of having been confronted with this type of technology on the battlefield. And of course, Ukraine will, as General Allen said, will give us. We have to learn from their experience on the battlefield at the speed of relevance. I think that it will be through experimentation, but it doesn't mean that we can keep. I think we can do both. We have to protect our data. Nations and people are looking for a certain level of sovereignty, and we can do it with the tools we have to protect the data, but we have to define exactly the data we need to keep as a sovereign, and to have this data sharing policy in order to win the war, as General Allen say. I think it's compatible.
Yeah, one quick way to kind of take up technology, of course, is smart procurement. And then this is also which comes up from the auditorium, that how to convince the governments about smarter procurement, how to simplify, but also be more clever, to leave more space for the technologies, not to define too precisely what you're going out there to procure. Any lessons from the other side of Atlantic on that?
Well, I think the other side of the Atlantic faces the same challenges as Europe does in making procurement smarter. First off, there are a lot of existing equities that don't want to change. I'm sure General Allen can speak to this in great detail. But secondly, there's risk, and governments don't want to take risk on new technologies, new companies that might fail. In a venture capital firm, it's okay if you fail 9 times out of 10 as long as your 10th is a home run. But in government, that's often not the way risk is looked at. And so we need to be more comfortable, I think, in testing products that might fail, testing capabilities that might not pan out. That's the only way we find out which ones will actually work.
Yeah, the risk aversion has really immobilized or paralyzed our willingness to move forward on some of these technologies. I think one of the things that I've been around this circle a number of times in the many years that I was in uniform, and I don't think I ever failed to pick up immediately. One of the Secretary of Defense's first goals was to streamline the acquisition process. Too long, too hard. Private sector's not part of the process until it's almost too late, and then it takes too long to get the equipment. And every single secretary has tried to go do that. I want to say, though, and I think she might be here, Kath Hicks, was the Deputy Secretary of Defense in the last administration. Of all the administrations I've watched over the last several years, I believe she led a process for the embrace and the implementation of technology faster than anyone I've seen. I don't know how this administration is going to go. It voices a lot of desire for warfighting capabilities. The president is very clear that he wants to embrace technology in our warfighting capabilities, but it's just too slow. It's legally exquisite. The process is legally exquisite, and it makes us strategically irrelevant. And so we've got to find the middle ground here. We've got to move faster. The enemy is not constrained by the same ethical or legal conditions that we have. I'm not proposing that we throw them out the window, but I know they can go faster, and we need to do that.
I noticed there was a question in the auditorium. If there is a microphone anywhere close, then please come forward.
GeoTech Guineria, Baltic Defense College. General Allen explained this new emerging multipolarity, which is quite visible, especially in the tech area. My question is actually, how much and to what extent does technological domination actually define geopolitical competition and domination in this great power competition? And most importantly, do you think that the US and Europe can remain as unified polar in this tech competition, or the competition is inevitable between the two players now?
Well, I think technology is increasingly going to be central to our capacity for warfighting. Again, if you go back to my hypothesis that we're headed towards a warfighting environment, which is that every dimension of warfighting accelerates because we're fighting from the cloud, we're applying AI tools, we've digitalized virtually all of our warfighting capabilities. That just means we're going to move faster, and we're not going to move faster without technology. And the more of this technology we're able to embrace and to apply effectively, and very importantly, the greater our deterrence. And I want our enemies to see us capable, if a war starts, of taking the battle to them, starting first in the cyber domain, and then shifting seamlessly back and forth in the physical domain to inflict punishment in precise humanitarian, but in precise ways that they can't possibly even imagine through the breadth and depth of their battle space. That their entire force, not their populations, not their non-combatants, not their critical infrastructure, but their entire force is at risk because the United States and our allies, our NATO allies, have the capacity to fight at a hyper-war speed using advanced technologies that we've developed together. And very importantly, it ain't gonna happen unless the private sector is a critical player in this process. Private sector's gotta be in the room when we talk about developing requirements. The private sector's gotta be in the room when we're doing exercises. It was just in East Asia, and I won't mention the command, but the private sector was invited to participate and observe a major exercise that's coming up where operating out of the cloud is going to be a major objective in this. Now, that's absolutely how we have to operate in the future. Thank you for that question. It's a really important one.
There's another one, please.
Hi, thank you. Joanna Bryson, Heritage School of Governance. So I've been in a lot of conversations like this with a number of members of the American Air Force militaries as well. And normally what we hear is that the rule of law and ethics is seen as an advantage. And Putin did brag that he had, AI, completely autonomous tanks, but we haven't seen that in Ukraine. Normally, entropy is seen as a bad thing on the battlefield, and it's most likely to harm the troops that deploy it. So I'm really surprised to hear a very different narrative here.
What's the surprise? I'm not sure I follow you.
Well, I mean, this is the sci-fi thing about the faster and faster and faster, but what I've heard consistently from NATO is that, that the ethical oversight has been persistently shown to be a strategic advantage, that we actually get better logistics, better command and control, more effective fighting from having very good control of our systems.
I didn't say that. I don't dispute that at all.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree.
Ethical oversight is the framework. I mean,
well, that's who we are.
Yeah,
that's
this is what we are. Yeah.
Militaries and democracies fight ethically. We fight with a humanitarian commitment.
And we only do.
No, what I'm saying is because the Chinese have no interposition in the decision to take human life, they inherently are able to apply their fires very quickly. My view would be, because we have a human in the loop, when we apply our fires, they both have the effect that we want, but we're also fighting ethically. And in the end, we got to be able to look ourselves in the mirror and be able to say that we have. You know, every commander on the battlefield has 3 obligations. Not to take human life unless it's necessary, so that's necessity. Number 2 is to take only that life which is necessary to accomplish the mission, which is fighting against combatants. And number 3 is to only use enough force to accomplish the mission. That is who we are. We go to war with that law of armed conflict out of the Geneva Convention. Our enemies are not so constrained. And even if we're using high technology and operating at high speeds, we are not absolved of our inherent responsibilities as commanders, ultimately to apply those tests. As a commander in the field, I applied a lot of fires in a couple of wars, but I didn't do it lightly. I took no pleasure in taking human life, and when we applied those fires, to the very best of my knowledge, we applied it against the enemy and not civilians. So your question is really important. It's really at the heart of who we are as militaries in the West.
But I think it is not limited only to the military capabilities. I mean, when I listen to Amy speak about, I mean, what enterprises and companies do, and I mean, then I see the same value base is present there, and they act based on that value base. Our time, of course, is up, but
I know our time is up,
quick
but there's
comment.
one question there,
Yes.
which says, should Europe move beyond cyber defense and start embracing offensive capabilities? And I think this is a question that kind of goes to some of the discussion that we've been having, which is, where are offensive capabilities appropriate? And I think first I want to make very clear that offensive capabilities are things that governments do. Those are under the rule of law, and those are capabilities that governments should be engaging in appropriately under their frameworks. So private sector actors do not and should not engage in offensive capabilities. So that, from a Microsoft perspective, we do not do offensive capabilities. Now, does that mean that I do not think that offensive cyber is appropriate? In many cases, offensive cyber, from a government perspective, could be the appropriate response. But it's also not the only response. So I think I want to call out that attribution is incredibly important. I think I saw a couple questions scroll by that was about how do we have the right cyber norms. I think the normative behavior is incredibly important. Having that attribution and having the right level of deterrence and having the right deterrence factors in place, whether those are sanctions or offensive capabilities from governments, are also things that are important in this space.
So to sum it up, from Tallinn manuals to lethal capabilities, our values underlie all our action. The distribution of powers and the responsibility and the oversight roles are clearly defined in democratic societies, and this is in the framework where our tech uptake is happening and will always be happening. Thank you all. We went slightly over time. I apologize, but please do not leave, because we will continue in just a few moments with a session called Beyond the West, Building Global Tech Partnership. So don't go anywhere. You can continue the same discussion we just ended. Thank you all for listening.